Hey, I am Robert with AMD Ryzen, and today we're here to talk about, AMD 3D V-Cache technology, which AMD debuted at Computex of 2021, but we're now going to turn it into a product with the Ryzen 7 5800X3D gaming processor and a selection of AMD EPYC CPUs for the data center. Now, how does this work? What is 3D V-Cache? How is it put together? Let's start with these very elaborate dice. No, that's not a D4. That's actually a diagram of a technology called Controlled Collapse Chip Connection, or C4. And when you try to stick two chips together on top of one another, they have to connect to one another somehow. There's got to be wires or something. And this technology, C4, classically is what allowed us to connect the top half to the bottom half. More recently, other vendors have been talking about 3D stacking as well, and they use a technology called microbump. You can see that the dots, the amount of connectivity for a given area, it's much more dense than C4. But that was not good enough for us at AMD. We wanted more density, better thermal management, better connectivity, and that takes us to a technology called Hybrid Bond 3D, which we call AMD 3D V-Cache. And you'll notice the dot pitch, that's just how many dots are in that space, is much more dense than any of these other chip connection technologies. And that is a start of why AMD 3D V-Cache is so good. We can fit a ton of wires, a ton of data bandwidth in a very, very small area. And I want to show you how it's built. How do you make this thing? So we're going to start actually with a typical, traditional Zen 3 die. Okay, and this is one of our 8-core, and we'll just label it Zen 3. Call this 8 cores, 16 threads, like you would find on a Ryzen 7 5800X. And it has a certain height. The height in this dimension is called the Z height. And it's important that this stays consistent in every AMD Ryzen 5000 series chip we produce, because when you look at your chip, you've got a heat spreader on top, the one that says Ryzen on it. Well, that has to fit a certain size CPU die. And then the heatsink that you got to put on top of that. Well, that's also designed for a certain height of this, plus a certain thickness of the heat spreader, et cetera, et cetera. Everything fits together perfectly. It's designed in the vertical dimension to fit perfectly. So what happens when you try to stick something on top, like 3D V-Cache? Well, you've made the die taller. Now, your heat spreader doesn't fit anymore, and your cooler doesn't fit anymore. So in addition to developing this ultra-dense connectivity, another thing we need to do is develop new technologies to bring the height down, or the Z height down, of the stacked thing. So another thing we can do is, it's called die thinning. So we're going to take that same Zen 3 die and grind it down to an incredible layer of thinness. You notice, you can see the relative size. It's much thinner in the vertical dimension, or in the Z height. And then when we stack 3D V-Cache on top, the important thing to note is that the overall size of this die, the real Zen 3 die, the original, and this guy, same height. Right? We've now stacked 3D cache on top of Zen 3. This is the 3D cache portion, and this is the Zen 3 portion. We've stacked it vertically. 3D V-Cache. We've put 64 megs of L3 cache on top, but the overall height of the original die and the stacked one, exactly the same. So we can put the heat spreader on top, you can put the cooler on top, it fits in socket AM4 motherboards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we build the compatibility that we do. That's how we get this extra density and this extra memory, and then fit it in the sockets and cooler ecosystem you already have. So die thinning, Hybrid Bond 3D. Those are two key things in AMD 3D V-Cache. So far we've talked about how it's built, but we didn't really talk about how it stays together. How do you stack one chip on top of another and have it not fall apart like a deck of cards on a table? Well, a very smart Dutch scientist named Johannes once figured out that if you have two surfaces that are perfectly flat and smooth, we're talking molecular perfection, and you bring them together, those surfaces will actually bond together to form a single cohesive unit. That is a physical force of the universe, like gravity for planets and stars and asteroids. Well, this force deals with very small molecular objects, and that's the force we're using to keep this together. There's no wires, rivets, glue that keeps the chip as a single unit. It is that same physical force, the one that keeps you together, keeps this chip together. And that is one of the many reasons why AMD 3D V-Cache technology, or hybrid bond 3D, is truly scientifically amazing. Next, you will probably want to know, why does this make games faster? What's the point? Well, let me draw something kind of to scale. I don't have a ruler, so we're just gonna fake it, but let's say this is the amount of time that it takes for your processor to fetch something from cache. So let's say that is cache, right? We're talking 64 megs that we stacked on top, or whatever amount is currently in the die, which oftentimes for AMD is 32 megs. So a total of 96 megs of cache. So that's the access time. What if we put RAM on here? What is the access time of fetching the same data from RAM? I'm just gonna go off the magical, whatever it is, the secret drawing technology, because it truly is that stark of a difference. Going to L3 cache typically takes about 8 to 10 nanoseconds, which is extremely fast. Going to RAM takes 8 to 10 times the amount of time. So how does that matter for a game? Well, in a game, you, the player, do random things all the time, and random is from the perspective of the computer. The computer cannot predict what you're gonna do. You may do a 360, you may do a 180, you may jump off a ledge, a character may pop around the corner. That all represents a moment of random data access. It has to load new textures, new models, animation, sound, physics, yada yada, and you can either get that information from local cache on the CPU, which is, as you can see, very fast, or you can wait practically forever in computer time to go fetch that from main memory, the RAM on your motherboard. That is the benefit of 3D V-Cache. It substantially increases the amount of data that you can get in this time, not this time. And for games who are always making hundreds, thousands of random requests per minute to keep up with what you, the player, are doing, this is obviously going to be lower latency. And lower latency, another way to say that, is less waiting. And less waiting means more information passing through the CPU per unit of time, which, that's performance. That's frames per second. And that is why the AMD Ryzen 5800X3D with 96 megs of L3 cache can outperform either the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X or the previous champion, the Ryzen 9 5900X. And the average gain of 3D V-Cache is 15% in 1080p. That's an architectural generation worth of performance. That's like going from Zen 2 to Zen 3 in terms of gaming performance, but we did it with memory technology, packaging the CPU differently. So now you begin to see that AMD has multiple ways to tune the performance of a CPU now. We can do it with advanced packaging, we can do it with new microarchitectures, we can do it with new process technologies. That's a lot of levers in the portfolio for AMD to go faster, stay ahead, be a gaming champion. So all of this, AMD 3D V-Cache, we introduced this, Computex 2021. It will be available in market in 2022. I hope this helps you understand how AMD 3D V-Cache works. And the thing I want to leave you with is that it's not just cache we can use this technology on. We can use hybrid bond 3D for more than cache. It could be GPUs, CPUs, memory, flash. The possibilities are endless with this technology, and who knows what the future might hold. But the key here, the thing to remember, is that this 3D V-Cache technology is just the beginning, and it will help AMD grow chips vertically with new capabilities and new performance rather than outwards. And that is how AMD is staying ahead of Moore's Law and staying ahead in the innovation race to bring you a really fast gaming CPU.